Now, we can also export classes from C++ to QML, and this is a 4-step process. The first 2 steps we're going to do in C++. We're going to subclass either QObject or QQuickItem. Then we're going to register the type with the QML engine through one of the methods that I mentioned earlier. And then the last step is that in QML, we're going to import the module using the import keyword, and then we're going to use it like any other standard item. Now, our general rule to determine what our item will be subclassed from is if it is a non-visual item, we will generally subclass it from QObject, and any visual ones, we will subclass from QQuickItem. So here, we're going to make a timer. We have my timer class. It is directly inherits the QObject. Note the first thing in our class here is this QObject macro. Your code will compile if you forget this, but weird things will happen. So remember to have the QObject macro if you're subclassing from a QObject. We're also going to include a QTimer that we're going to use. Next, we're going to implement our class. We're going to set our appropriate values, instance our objects as we need to. Here, we're making the timer and we're setting its interval as well as starting the time. Then in our main, we're going to go ahead and register this. We've included our type. We're going to make we're included our type, and here we're going to register it as an instanceable type. So we're going to use QML register type. The type goes in the angle brackets, and then we have the name of the module followed by the version major, version minor, followed by what we want to call that on the QML side. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, generally we use the same name as the object itself. So here, just to look at this a little more in depth, we have QML register type, followed by the type we are registering. Inside of our brackets, we have the string for the module it's going to be, our version 1.0, and then the my timer, which is what we're going to call it on the QML side. So now that we've done all of our C++ stuff, we can we can go ahead and use our actual QML. So we're going to import our custom components 1.0 module that we just made. And then later on, we're going to make a timer, my timer. Now, this is our custom timer. Now, currently, our timer is not providing anything useful at all. So let's make it a little bit more useful. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to add a property here. So right before the public section, I'm going to put QProperty, parentheses type, property name, read, getter function, followed by either a closing parentheses, or optionally, I'm going to have a write with the setter function and a notify with the signal that's emitted when it changes. Now, this might sound a little confusing, but if we look at our example, we've provided an interval property. Here, we have an interval, we have our read and our write, those are setter and getter, and we have our notify. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in our public our setter and getter, and we're going to declare our signal that we've named. Then in our C++, we're going to implement our functions. So here at the top, we have our setter function. Notice that the first thing we do is check if our new value is equal to our current value, and if so, we return. Anytime that we're emitting stuff here, we want to make sure to only emit when the data changes. If the data is already equal, there's nothing for this function to do. So we're going to return. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and reset our timer and then emit that the interval has changed. And for our interval read function, we're simply just going to return the value of the interval. Now, another thing that we can do with C++ classes is we can add signals. And if we do this, QML is automatically going to provide us an on signal name handler, just like it would if we created this signal in QML itself. So here I'm creating a signal called timeout for our Q timer, or for our my timer object. On the QML side, it will have an on timeout handler. Now, the way we're going to make this work is we're going to construct a signal to signal connect statement. Here we're going to connect my timer, or the M timer's timeout signal, to this instance's timeout signal. And when M timer fires its timeout, our timer will automatically also fire its timeout as well. Now later in QML, when we want to use this, it's as simple as using the provided handler, just like any other QML that we would make. So here again, we have my timer. We have an on timeout handler now. So we simply can use on timeout with a capital T. And here we're just logging to the console that our timer has fired. Now, we can also add methods to our exposed C++ in two different ways. We can either create functions as slots, and these are going to be automatically exposed to QML without the need of that QInvocable macro. And these are useful for when you don't have return values. And the other way to do this is to mark functions with QInvocable, and this allows us to have values returned. So let's look at an example invocable function. Here we're going to create an invocable function called random interval. It's going to return an int, and it's going to take 2 ints in. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some logic to it. We're going to make a random number. So we're just going to return a random number here in our range. Now notice in our C++, we are not using the QInvocable macro here when we define the body of this function. We only do that in the header file. Now, when we use this in QML, we can go ahead and just use it by qualifying it with timer.randomInterval. We'll give it the 2 values, and it will provide for us the value to set our interval.
Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more, please subscribe to our channel and check out the free QML programming course on our website. The link is in the description.